Welcome to the Raising Killin podcast. My name is Marsh Naidu and I blog at raisingkillin.org, where we curate resources for families experiencing disabilities. On today's episode 172, I am joined by Theresa Sweeney. Theresa is co-founder of National Disability and Home Care Rights Coalition based in Ohio. Theresa, welcome to the Raising Killin podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here and talk about what's happening right now across the country.
But first off, just to give us a sense of what the organization does, can you tell us how and why National Disability and Home Care Rights Coalition started?
Sure. The National Disability and Home Care Rights Coalition was created because we believe disability civil rights are human rights. And we believe people across the country need to come together around ADA protections, Olmstead, Section 504, HCBS, privacy, due process, caregiver rights, and equal dignity. I think what we've been seeing with the memo that came out recently from the DOJ and states eroding people's rights for Olmstead and to be able to stay within their home and community, we were seeing huge fractions within the disability communities as well. Between, especially here in Ohio, we have different waiver systems and different services available under these systems. And there was just this really kind of disappointing fracture in our community. And we felt that, this is kind of happening around the country. And what our goal is to bring organizations and people that are dealing with all of this together to, figure out how to fight back and how to preserve all of these rights. I think it's really important to talk about, how we're all going through different things. We live different lives with different forms of disability, but at the same time, we are all the same. We're all under these waiver systems. We're all having really difficult issues within our states with funding. The big, beautiful bill that is going to start January 1st of 2027 is impacting how states are deciding, how to fund their waivers. And you can see already a lot of states are pulling back. They're cutting reimbursement. They're removing caregivers from their roles. And it's a really scary time, I think, for people in the United States that rely on the waiver systems and Olmstead to remain in their homes. Our idea is that, while families may be under different waivers, agencies, eligibility categories, or service models, the risks are similar. What do we do in order to and stop the things that are happening? What guardrails can be put in place? What laws could we potentially, push for and lobby for? I think these are all really, really big things that are going to require a lot of effort from everyone, and we cannot work in silos anymore. This is going to everyone to come together and unify, regardless of, of our differences, because I think at the moment, right now in this moment, we have more similarities than we have differences.
So that DOJ opinion that you were talking about, the Olmstead decision, for listeners that might not be aware of what's going on, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Theresa, but this is my understanding, right? The Olmstead decision was a Supreme Court decision that allowed for integration of persons with disabilities within their communities and least restrictive environments. So essentially, it called for home and community-based services. The DOJ opinion, more or less, and I do want to say it's a memo, so it's not changing the actual law, but it does perhaps put a suggestion forth that integration or those integration mandates are not mandatory. So can you kind of speak more to that memo and what you guys as the National Disability and Home Care Rights Coalition find disconcerting about the memo?
Sure. So, June 18th, 2026, the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel memorandum states that Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act do not impose a general integration mandate on states. It argues that federal law prohibits discrimination through unjustified institutionalization, but they do not actively require states to provide home or community-based services. So essentially, this does put people at risk of institutionalization. And, I think one of the most interesting things that I read recently was an article by Bruce Darling, President, CEO, Center for Disability Rights. And, he talks in a very easy to understand way about this whole idea of like the integration mandate and all of these things that we're at risk of losing also. And so why I had pulled up his article was I wanted to dive deeper into the piece of legislation, the LaTonya Reeves Freedom Act, and all of the things, obviously, all tie back in together. So this piece of legislation was named in honor of LaTonya Reeves, a woman who was forced to flee a Tennessee nursing home and moved to Colorado so she could access the care she needed to live independently. Essentially, this is a federal civil rights legislation that connects directly to the Olmstead Act and the integration mandates and everything. It addresses the injustices of people with disabilities who need long-term services and supports being forced into institutions when they could live in the community with the right supports. And so, looking at Section 504, the ADA, these were huge civil rights victories. Unfortunately, they were never codified into law in a way that forced states to provide the funding. And that's precisely what we're looking at with the LaTonya Reeves Freedom Act. It will give advocates something concrete to support federally. And I think, again, when we're talking about working as a coalition throughout the entire United States, bringing together organizations and disabled people, their families, so we can all work together to try and get something like this passed. What it will do is it will give stronger protections for people who need long-term supports and services. Looking at the choices that people have now today, while they're pretty good, and some areas are better than others, and some states are better than others for fulfilling the current mandate, I think we need to stop treating community living as optional while institutionalization is firmly protected. States are required to fund nursing home care through Medicaid, but right now they could pull the funding and they would have the support of the DOJ. They could pull funding for HCBS waivers. And where would we all be?
Theresa, let's talk about the narrative of fraud, waste, and abuse that seems to be plaguing our social safety systems like Medicaid. What are your thoughts about this?
Yes, so I have some pretty big thoughts about this. As you know, Ohio's been targeted, as has Minnesota, by the federal government as kind of an epicenter of fraud, waste, and abuse. There was a YouTuber who came into Ohio, down to Columbus, which is where our state house is, and alleged that there are hundreds of Somalian agencies committing fraud. we still haven't seen the proof of that, by the way. There has been absolutely nothing that has shown that. And I think they also tried to tie it to one of our state legislators as well, whose office was in the same building. Again, haven't heard any more about that as well. But the whole point of the fraud, waste, and abuse narrative is to foment hate towards the disability community, I believe. I think there's been for a very long time, I mean, looking back even at Reagan with the welfare queen and using that to, kind of turn people against Medicaid and see this as, something that our tax dollars are funding, and, we should control how all of this is spent. And, why are we paying to keep people in their home and community and assist them with, going to day habs and jobs. And, there's also been a bit of a narrative too, talking about how people are just being paid to go and sit with grandma and watch TV or have some Campbell's soup. And that really is not what's happening. This idea that also that it's certain ethnic groups committing fraud too is hugely problematic, because then it brings in this very racist idea about the people committing fraud, because also that's been, there's just been a lot of race baiting around Medicaid for years for persons of color and, things like that. And, a lot of narratives that just aren't really true. I think it's really sad considering all of the great things that Medicaid does. It really is a social safety net. People who couldn't otherwise get insurance because they either can't work or they're, in jobs that are so low paying, they couldn't afford the insurance plans at their work. People who suddenly become ill and can't work and need medical care. These are all the things that Medicaid does, not to mention, like here in Ohio, a majority of newborns in certain areas are born, under Medicaid. We look at all the things that Medicaid covers, and it really is from birth to death. We talked about the mandate that states have to pay for Medicaid beds in nursing homes, but they're not required to fund HCBS waivers. And so I think that's an interesting aspect of the system as well. But for us, it's very problematic because, we would like to see all of these things as being required to be covered by Medicaid, not just nursing home beds. I have a friend who very publicly stated that if she has to return to a nursing home after spending several years there and finally getting an exit waiver to get out and get her own apartment, and she's very young, and be able to have the life that she wants to live, that she will end her life. And I don't think she's the only person who's thinking this way or saying it out loud. And that really hurts me a lot because, I want to see people thriving in our society and in our communities. And why are we using rhetoric like broad, about the Medicaid system? And honestly, I know some people don't want to hear this, but we have seen the cuts in the Medicaid system coming to fund an illegal war. And we know this. It's been said out loud. It's not like they're doing this in secret. They want to take the money from Medicaid in order to fund something else. And in this case, it's an illegal war or it's tax cuts for billionaires. And neither of those things should be happening. I think it's really difficult for people who've never had to access Medicaid or had to ask for help of any kind to process what this means. This is not an easy system to access, and it's just been made more difficult. The level of of difficulty of access now in the state of Ohio is pretty unbelievable. My friend works at the library and said that they have people coming in all day, every day, seeking help to understand how to log into the system, because now you have to create in Ohio what's called an Ohio ID. And that glitches all the time. You can put your perfect password in there and you still can't get in and access the Medicaid system. Uploading documents now. How are seniors and people with developmental disabilities that have cognitive impairments doing these things? We're all very overwhelmed if we're dealing with the system already. And the amount of time and effort that it takes is astounding. And if you miss your deadlines, now you don't have medical insurance and you have to start all over again, and then you don't have access to your medications. You don't have access to the care that you need. You can't get to the doctor. This system is really supposed to be a safety net. And I think that it's very unlikely that people are abusing the system because it is so incredibly difficult to access in the first place. There's so many guardrails in place, especially here in Ohio. And I think our governor said recently, that our system is pretty locked down. And I would agree with Governor DeWine. Our system is pretty locked down. Even if you're a provider billing the state of Ohio for Medicaid services, it's an extremely difficult process. A friend of mine who is a therapist lost $30,000 one year because she just couldn't get her claims paid out by the state. This is really a very difficult system. I can tell you that I become overwhelmed by it, and I have seen year after year the layers of administrative tasks that they make you do and the hoops that you have to jump through have just become more and more and bigger every single year. And like I said, people are seeking outside assistance, trying to get to get their applications done. Why are we creating so much difficulty for people? Well, of course, it's so that they just don't access services and the states don't have to pay out. I mean, at the end of the day, every state wants to make it as difficult as possible, whether it's for a person who needs the services, whether it's for a person who's billing for services rendered. They're really trying to make sure that people just can't get the reimbursement. Here in Ohio, we're not even 100% sure where all the unspent Medicaid dollars go to. My son has what we like to call an empty waiver. Besides his hands-on care, we can't access anything else. We've been denied service for every single thing. If you Google my hometown, you will find that we have chronic power outages because we live in an older city with an aging infrastructure, and there is one power company, and they are failing to upgrade their system. So when that happens, if you want to talk about fraud, waste, and abuse in the Medicaid system, we're told, no, the state of Ohio will not pay for a generator for you so that your son's ventilator and oxygen can continue to work. Go to the emergency room. Utilize the emergency room. If he doesn't have an emergency under Medicaid, that's considered waste and abuse of the system. If we're, if we're unable to access things like a generator, which he needs, why would I want to go to the emergency room where now he's going to be exposed to all kinds of sick people? And then maybe he'll catch something, and then it's going to become a really big bill for Medicaid because then he's going to end up in the hospital. It's such a confusing and bizarre system. And I think they're just hoping that people give up for the most part. I think they figure like we make it hard enough, people are going to give up and move on. And like I said, my friend who lost a ton of money as a provider, she gave up. There's only so many times that you can submit for billing, and where you're now losing money beyond that dollar amount because your time is money. And for people who need to access the system, when they cannot figure out how to get an application in online, they're completely out of luck.
Teresa, listen, you guys are so organized, right? The National Disability and Home Care Rights Coalition. How I found out about y'all was through a unity statement that y'all put out after the DOJ opinion. Can you please tell us about the unity statement and, perhaps a call to action for parents out there listening, very concerned about what's happening, waiting for some direction from perhaps other disability rights agencies, but in the meantime, want to try and get some momentum going? What would you suggest, and how would you advise us?
Sure. Well, so the reason that we created the unity statement is to give people across every state, diagnosis, waiver program, political belief, and advocacy community a way to stand together around shared principles, which are dignity, choice, community living, privacy, due process, caregiver rights, and protection from unnecessary institutionalization. And this is why unity matters. Unity does not mean that we all agree on all things. It does not mean that we all use the same language or have the same diagnosis, service model, political beliefs, or lived experience. Unity means we agree on shared principles. Disabled people deserve dignity. Aging loved ones deserve dignity. People should not be unnecessarily institutionalized. HCBS must be protected. Privacy and due process matter. Family caregivers should not be treated as suspects. Real fraud should be investigated without using fraud as an excuse to punish innocent families. And no diagnosis group, waiver population, age group, or family should be left behind. What we can do is really just be very strategic. A divided community is easy to ignore and dismiss. A united community, though, is really difficult to dismiss. When families, self-advocates, providers, direct support professionals, disability organizations, aging advocates, and community members stand together, we have a stronger voice when we are united. And I think that's what we have to do. We put everything else aside and just focus on those things. It really is the only way that we are going to overcome all of this adversity that we're experiencing right now.
So what is the plan for the unity statement? So after a parent reads and say agrees to it, what is the process from there moving forward?
Sure. So I think right now what we're really encouraging people to do is to reach out to their federal legislators about the LaTanya Reeves Freedom Act and ask them to support it. You can reach out to your congresspersons and your senators and ask them to co-sponsor bills. And, right now, I think that is probably one of the most important things that we can be doing nationally as a disability community. I don't know, we did talk about this earlier, that, what the LaTanya Reeves Freedom Act is. And I think right now it's there, to really provide stronger protections for people who need long-term services and supports. And if we can't get this codified into law, we're going to continue to experience what we're experiencing now, which is, cut to services, removing people in certain groups as providers, such as family members, to cut back on Medicaid expenses, because there is this idea in state waiver programs that people should be providing natural supports if you're family members. And while that's a nice idea, it's not real life, and it's not at all practical, because for a lot of families, it is a literal make or break if they aren't able to access being paid for the care that they provide. If I could read this from a really great article that I read by Bruce Darling,
yes, please.
CEO, Center for Disability Rights. he says that this act creates an affirmative, judicially enforceable statutory right. The existing integration mandate lived in agency regulations that Loper empowered courts to disregard, and that the OLC memo now calls unlawful. The LRFA creates a statutory right enforceable in federal court, one that no future administration can rescind by memo. And I think that's a really powerful statement, and I wholly agree with Mr. Darling. I really hope that people will come together and reach out to their senators and their congresspersons and implore them to support this act and really stand behind the disabled community in the United States, because no one wants to go back to institutionalization. Anyone who has seen the original expose by Geraldo Rivera, you can never get that out of your mind ever. And we're still seeing those same atrocities today. There's still absolute horror stories coming out of institutions across the United States. And while I understand that there are some people who choose to live in an institution, or for whatever reason their families need to utilize an institution, I don't want them to feel villainized here, because that's not what we're trying to do at all. But because I do believe that the majority of disabled people do want to remain within their communities and be integrated into the community as much as possible. And that is what we should be doing. I've seen this in other countries. I have seen how this works elsewhere, and why we cannot do this here in the United States, I do not understand. We work so hard at creating division, and again, this is why this unity statement exists. I mean, we all have the same goal at the end of the day, no matter what differences we have. The biggest, binding thing here is our interest in preserving the rights of disabled people to remain in their home and community, to work, live, and play. And, the only way that is going to happen is for all of us to put whatever differences we have aside and come together and fight. We have to fight as though our disabled communities' lives depend on this, because they absolutely do.
Theresa, you have given us so much to think about. Not only that, we have actionable steps. We will have the unity statement attached to the show notes for parents to actually go back and read, so that they can weigh this and see what they need to do moving forward. In addition, I would like to attach the link to the article you mentioned by, is it Bruce Darling?
That's correct.
And then the other is a link to perhaps for folks to learn more about the Latanya Reeves Freedom Act. Well, thank you so much, Theresa. I see this as us continuing engaging with each other to work towards a common solution for our family members and members of our community. And I'm truly am grateful for your time. I know it's not easy, so thank you so much for giving this time to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on. We really appreciate it when people hear your podcast, that they reach out to us. You can find us on Facebook. We are not a nonprofit. We are just some parents that got together and formed this coalition. And, we would love to hear from other organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, because we really are just trying to get as many people as possible together to fight this fight. I mean, oh goodness, of course, now I'm going to forget his name, but the John Lewis,
yes,
was a famous
good trouble. Let's get into some good trouble.
Good trouble, because honestly, this is exactly what we need to be doing. And again, coming together and unifying. It is the only way. We cannot do this alone. We can't do this separately. It has to be one unified group of people, and I think we can do it. I really do.
Thank you, Theresa. You have an amazing evening, and thank you so much again for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. The National Disability and Home Care Rights Coalition really appreciates being on your podcast.
Thank you for listening along to the podcast today. We would appreciate you sharing this content with families that would benefit from it. Please keep tuned for more details as we bring you more information with regards to these policy changes. You will find links to the article by Bruce Darling, as well as the link to the unity statement from the National Disability and Home Care Rights Coalition. As always, remember, get to the top of your mountain. This is Marsh Naidu signing off.